All right, we're back. It is COMP123. That's Programming 2, Summer 2016, Semester Centennial, and it is week 14. We're doing a review for our exam, which is happening on Friday. Okay, lots of stuff that can be on the exam for Friday. So let's talk about what most potentially will be on the exam. So I'm just going to launch my VM just for a second to bring that up. So again, part of the challenge when we do an exam for C# is how much can you do within the time you have, right? Just like we did last exam. Last exam was a disaster because you had an hour and a half to do something that was measured that you could probably do, and some of you couldn't get through it. There was just too much to do. The other problem with exams are that, and I mentioned before, that you have switch over here to this one. I'm back. Is that when you're working with someone else's work, right? That's really weird. That's so small. When you're doing somebody else's work or working with somebody else's project, like for example, I'm giving you a project and you have to look at it for the first time. It's not your project, right? So because you're not familiar with it, it's going to take you extra time, right? You mentioned that before, right? You say like, give us some stuff that you've given us, and then we can work with it. So I'm going to tell you how you're going to start right now. I'm going to give you a project that you've already seen. One of the projects that we've done throughout this time, with working together. And I'm going to base the exam off that project. You're going to have to do extra stuff with that project, right? So it's not something that you haven't seen before. So that's the first thing that you have to know. So one of these lessons that I've worked on with you from the second half of the semester, when it comes to Windows forms, because we've been talking about Windows forms this whole time, right? Pretty much. One of the questions you're going to have is, are we going to do any kind of database connection stuff? And the answer is no, right? Because we have no time for that. We only have an hour and a half. If I make you connect to a database or something crazy like that, because only have an hour and a half, and we just introduced it, very briefly, and we haven't really done an assignment 100% based on database, right? I don't feel it's fair for that to happen, so don't expect any kind of database stuff to be on the exam. It just doesn't make any sense for us. Remember, you're going to do more database stuff coming with Programming 3, right? As you move into Programming 3, you're going to more connections. You've seen how to do a connection here. That's what I've had to introduce with you, right? But the idea is that when it comes to database stuff, chances are you won't have to do it. And I'll let this thing do what it's supposed to do. My lovely VM. So that's one. Second thing I want to talk about with the exam is what will you have to do. So I told you database is not going to be on it for sure. You're going to have to know things about Windows forms. It's going to be on the exam. So if you haven't played around with BMI calculator, if you haven't done your last assignments, if you haven't done the the movie thing, my movie assignment, the movie bonanza thing, or video bonanza thing, and you haven't done BMI, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, it's just bottom line. You're going to be using Windows forms. That's part of it, right? You need to know how to, can't forget about classes and objects. You need to know how to make, or use classes and objects. So if you don't know about that stuff, I can't help you. It's good. I mean, by now you should know all about classes and objects, inheritance, all that kind of stuff. That is definitely part of what you're going to be doing on the exam. So part of your test is going to be, how do I use classes and objects? Those kind of things. Let's go back to what we did last day, which was we did kind of this lesson 13. Last week we were working on a character generator, right? And I want to talk about some of these things. I gave you this project, right, because I wanted you to look at things like the ability to generate random numbers. You should know how to do that. When you double click on an object, if I tell you to double click on something, right, you know that it's going to generate an event handler, right? And how to deal with that event handler. For example, when I double clicked on the generate button, you know that it's going to create almost like this little stub, and then you can put something inside of it to as an action. So here's my click, and what's the click action? Well, anything that's inside of these curly braces, you're going to have to know how to do that, right? These are basics. You're going to have to know a little bit about UI controls. Every Windows form has a bunch of controls, right? And all controls have standard properties. You need to know how to use those things. All right. I know this sounds like really basic, but truly, this is what you need to know how to do. You're going to build a UI for your exam. You're going to build something, a little bit of an app that you can build within 90 minutes, right? And it has to kind of work together, right? So if I've given you something to do, or you're going to build additional forms, right, or additional parts of an app. I'm going to give you an app that's already kind of half functional as an example, and what you're going to do is you're going to finish it off, right? But that means that the part that's functional is working, right? And now you're going to add some extra stuff to that, right, to finish it off, like your part, right? Imagine if you're working in a team of developers, and other developers have worked on a part of your Windows application, and you're going to finish off the Windows application with whatever you need to do. Things to study from a controls perspective, because we need to talk about controls, right? So if I look at the standard toolbox of controls that you need to know how to use, all right, for the exam. Buttons. Definitely know how to use buttons, right? You may need to know checkboxes, but we haven't really talked about the difference between a checkbox. Remember, checkboxes and radio buttons are the same. Chances are I'm not going to put checkboxes, like an actual checkbox, on the exam. So you may not know how to, need to know how to do that. Checklist box, no. Check a combo box, like one of these. You're going to need to know how to do these, because I've explained that. I spent like all of last week talking about combo boxes, right? So you need to know how to do combo boxes. Chances are it's going to be on your test, right? Label, definitely. Any kind of labels that you put on there. Notice that text boxes, which are on your exam. So if we're going to go to the text boxes, that's definitely going to be something that you're going to put in your exam. And labels are definitely there. So labels, text boxes, buttons, those are basic building blocks for any kind of UI that we can put on your exam, right? Let me see what else that's in here. Picture box, as an example. You may have a picture box that you have to deal with, right? How do I get an image from a picture box? Hey, I gave you a whole assignment on how to swap images into a picture box, right? Which is the last assignment, which is the movie Bonanza, right? How to switch images from a picture box. You should know how to do that, right? On an exam. In fact, the things that I've already asked you to do on your assignment, your last two assignments, the DMI calculator and the movie Bonanza, if you know how to do, if you've done those two assignments, you should be fine with all the controls you need for your exam, okay? So that's the basics for what you need. Probably won't have a lot of radio buttons or anything like that. I mean, I kind of talked about radio buttons last time when we talked about the racing class form from a design tool perspective, right? So remember I had this racing class form, and then I did these simple buttons. But notice, like I talked about last week, they have to be inside of a group box for you to know that one of them has been selected, compared to the other ones, right? That's one thing. All right, so that's some of the stuff. Rich text box, not going to happen. We haven't talked really about that. Tool tips, I haven't talked about, so you're not going to have it on. Tree view, no. Web browser, absolutely not. So those things are not going to be on the exam, right? From a containers perspective, you need to know how to do a group box, right? Group box will be on the exam, all right? So those are the things that you need to know how to do. So how to put stuff in a group box. Panels and split containers and tab controls, all that kind of stuff, not going to be on the exam, right? And neither will be a flow layout panel or any other kind of grid or anything else that we've used for your first assignment. Not going to be on the exam, right? Menus and toolbars. You may have to do a menu strip, so I would study that. We haven't really talked about a tool strip because a tool strip requires images, to put on the toolbar, right? You can't just have like stuff, and we haven't talked about how to get these images. So I'm probably not going to put a tool strip on the exam, right? Like, for example, if I was to use my race and select race, and if I was going to drag and drop a tool strip, right? When this stuff, we haven't talked about this. It's going to add a new object down here, tool strip 1. And notice if I add an object, let's say for a button, it'll just appear like a button like this. And that's not really cool, right? So that's not going to be on the exam. That doesn't make any sense. I haven't talked about this, so how could I put it on, right? It's very simple, though. If you were going to use a tool strip, and if I asked you to do something, if it was something that you haven't seen before, I think you could infer how they work. You have properties for an object, right? So here's the item that I'm getting you to do, and then these are the object's properties, right? So obviously, if I wanted you to do that, it's not like it would be impossible for you to understand what to do. Yeah, so that's not going to be there. So I can remove that. So tool strip, like I said before, not going to be on the exam. I got to cut it down because there's just so much. I can ask you for anything. We already talked about data. Data not going to be on the exam. Like any kind of binding navigator, that's not going to be. If I go back down here, components like error provider. I haven't really talked about error provider. I haven't talked about these kind of components. So anything in the components folder here, process, serial port, timer might be on the exam because I might ask you to do a splash page. We talked about splash pages like already a couple times. So expect the splash page to be on the exam. I'm going to ask you to do a splash page. All right, just FYI. Figure it out, have it ready, whatever you want to do, but that's going to be on the exam with the timer that I'm probably going to ask you to do like 3 seconds. Make a splash page, 3 seconds. It's going to be on the exam. So I've already done it a couple of times. Right, so don't be surprised if I ask you for it. Right? But other than that, help providers, image lists, all this other stuff, things I haven't talked about will not be on the exam. Printing, we haven't really talked about, not going to be on the exam. All right? Dialogues, color dialogues, font dialogues, open file dialogues, all these dialogues, they're easy to use, not going to be on the exam because we haven't talked about it, right? Again, we only have so much we can talk about, and that's it. So I've talked about what's not going to be on the exam, but the rest is all fair game. So anything else like standard buttons, standard text boxes, standard labels, how to use them, the events. You should know the events of a page, all right? What are the events of the page? The major events of all pages are open event, right? When the page loads, all right? So how does it work? How do I figure out the events of a form? If I click onto it and if I go to the lightning bolt, you can see that there are several different kinds of events. The main one is the load event. So when the form loads, right? But remember, if I go back to a form, it doesn't spark off the load event again. It only happens one time when the form is created for the first time, right? So I may ask you to put something in the load event, right? The other thing that you may have to do is in the activated event. The activated event is when the form draws again. Every time when it becomes active or inactive. Every time I do that, the activated event triggers, right? So you may be required to do that, to put something in the activated event. Also, when the form is closing, right? So remember that there's the form closing event. The form closing event is when you shut the form down, right? Just before it shuts down, the form closing event triggers. And then there's another event after that, the form closed event, after it's been closed. What do? You can put stuff in there too. So you should really know about the life cycle of forms, right? Like how it opens, how it draws, and everything else. The stuff we've talked about anyway. There's other things we haven't really talked about because we really don't have time. For example, the paint event, which you really haven't had time. When it actually physically draws your form. We don't need to talk about that, and I'm not going to get you to do it. But that's part of the life cycle. And when I say life cycle, it means when the form is created and when it's destroyed. That's what I mean, right? So we don't need to know all of it, but at least the parts that I've shown you. Okay, so those kind of the things that you need to know about forms for sure. Let's go back to properties. I'm going to ask you to do something with the properties. I'm probably going to ask you to put things in center screen. You should know where that is in a form and what that means, right? How do I resize, the form? If I ask you to make it a certain size, I may ask you to do that. I may ask you, from a form perspective, to change the font and the font size. That makes sense, right? Because I've changed the font and font size of a form so many times. You've seen that over and over again. So standard things that we've talked about before. How to turn off the control box. How to make the control box false, which means don't show the controls on the top of the form. How to change the borders, form border style, which would be here, fixed single, right? As opposed to sizable. Sizable allows you to resize the form. Fixed single does not allow you to resize the form. It stops you from resizing, all that kind of stuff. How to go from one form to the other. What are the 3 steps involved in creating another form for the other form, right? And be able to go traverse back and forth between 2 forms. How do I do that? Let's use these forms as an example, all right? I have 2 forms here, the ability generator form. Please be careful and please watch carefully. If you haven't had a chance to, or if you're not going to watch this, please watch the video afterwards, because I'm going to ask you to do something like this, right? So if you don't watch now, you won't know how to do it or even to get it on the GitHub, right? So let's take a look. So again, if I'm going to go from one form to the other, I need some kind of button or control to take me there. And if I start off with ability generator form, right, and I click on the next button, that next button is going to take me to the next form, chances are, inside of my wizard, my form, my application, right? So if you double click on the next, you can see here that I do several different things. Right here, I set up the, I set my character to, this new character class that we created last time, and then we pass the information into the character class. This is key if I was going to create something like this from I have a class, and that's going to be the way I'm going to propagate or move the data from one form to the other through a class container, right? That's a good way of doing it, as opposed to, putting it inside all the labels or text boxes. That doesn't make any sense, right? But definitely this is the steps, okay? So if I was going to do step one, so this is step one for doing this. So step one would be hide the form, right? Hide this form. Hide the original or the originator, if you will, or the parent form. We'll call it the parent form, right? That's step one. Step two, right? Step two is instantiate. Right? That's the second part. Instantiate an object of the form type you're going to go to next. That's step two. So in this particular case, because we've already had a form that we created called race and class form, we make a new object of race and class form and instantiate it. We need to do that because if we don't instantiate it, that object doesn't exist, and therefore I can't show anything, right? Step three, right? Make a which is not here actually. Step three, we're going to put it in here, but you can't do it here. Step three is, create a property in the next form, right? To point to, or that we will use, to point to this form, right? And an example of that would be example. We'll make a public property called PreviousForm, and if I go to the race and class form, right, you can see at the top I have this public property, right, called PreviousForm. I'm just going to copy this thing here, so we'll copy it. I'll go back to my text, and I'll paste it in. What happened? Oh, there we go. And that was not what I want to do. Let's try that again. I meant to do, when my VM responds, it's saving auto recovery information, right? Thank God for auto recovery information. Okay. Copy. Sorry. Differences between one VM and the host machine. Okay. So example, public ability generator form, which would be this form, the one I'm in right now. We make a variable we call PreviousForm, right? And I make it public so that inside this form, the one I'm in right now, which would be step 4. So this is step 4. Step 4, point this form, or to the property in the next form. What do you want to call it? The form property, parent form property in the next form. I'm saying next form and parent form because it can be any form, not just because in this case and this is this part right here. This is line 180. That's what you're doing, right? And then the next one would be show the next form. Step 5. Show the next form. Okay? So those are all the steps to hide my form, make a new one, instantiate one, make a property that's going to be existing. In this particular case, the public ability generator form. We create an object, a variable called PreviousForm, and what we're going to do and point this form. When I say this form, to the parent form property in the next form, which means assign this. This is representative of the scope of this form here. This represents this object, which is ability to generate form in this case, right? And you pointed at used previous form, so racing class form, which is the next form, right? Dot previous form, which is what I named it up here, right? Previous form is equal to this, which means take a pointer or a reference of this, the scope that we're in right now, and assign it to previous form. So that means I have a reference to which form came before, which is this one right here that I'm working on, right? And then show the next one. Okay, how do I go back? This is how do I go there? How do I come back? Because I have a back button. You're going to have to navigate between forms, right? So let's go back to the next one. So if I go to race and class form and I want to go back, right? How do I do the back way? So here's my back button. I got my back button right here. So double click. And in my back button, notice that I might have to save some kind of information or whatever, right? But here's the 2 steps. Step 1, right? When I go back, show the previous form or the parent form, right? And then step 2, close this form, right? 2 steps. So when I'm closing one form off, I'm going back to the previous one. But before I go there, before I close my form off, I show the next one first. Why? Because if I close my form off, it won't go to the next line. It'll stop, right? So that's, this line will never get, you'll never get to this one. You'll never get to show anything because it'll close, right? If I close it down, it means shut it down. That form is not active anymore. And it won't, it may not execute line 35 as an example, if it was the other way around, if we put these 2 things in reverse order, all right? So those are all the steps that you need to kind of navigate between forms. There's a couple ways to pass data between forms, and one of the ways, like I said, is create another class, a container class, to carry the information, right? So the both forms have access to that same class. And in this particular example that I'm using here, I'm using the character class to be able to do that for you, right? So if I go back, how do I create the character class in this case, or the class, whatever the container class is going to be called, to pass data from one form to the other, right? In your program.cs, notice that we created a public static object, this class called character. This is where we actually declare the object, right? An instance of the character class, right? We still have to have the character class in place. So I need a character or some kind of class that I'm going to use as a container. So this is my class. Right now, it only has these particular properties, right? You may be asked to make a class like this to carry information from one form to the other, right? Because all we're going to do is instantiate an object of that class and then fill the properties with data while we're going from one form to the other. So I don't have to pass it information necessarily from one form to the other. And even if I go back, I have all the data in my class that's separate from the forms. The forms are just visual representations of our data. The character class in this case would be the container class that holds all the data for our whole application, right? That's what it does. And that's a better way of passing information from one form to the other, all right? If I pass it into the text fields, that means if the form dies, the text fields are gone and we lose the data, right? We don't want that. But if I pass it into a class, an object an object instance of a class, unless I destroy that object instance, it's going to survive the application. As long as my application stays open, I have an object a container object that I can pass data into. It's a much better solution, okay? But I'm going to instantiate that inside my program.cs because in here, as a static object, it's a container object that I'm going to have access to for right away, right? And remember, when I do that, if I'm going to do this in this case, I had to make the new object, which is character, public static, as well as I had to make the program itself, the driver class, also public static, because originally it's not public, just FYI. So when you start off a new application, the program class is not public. We have to change that. So please remember to do that. Okay? Otherwise, you're not going to be able to go and say program.character. It won't access. We won't be able to see the character class at all. Okay? Here, I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change any of these things, right? Well, you have to know about visual inheritance for the final exam? No. It was just a concept I wanted to share with you that you can do visual inheritance, but it provides some complexities that maybe you should avoid. And I'm not going to ask you to do that. I would not recommend you trying it on the exam. I think it's going to just it might derail you. It might cause problems. Like, you know, if, you know, for it's fancy, it's nice. If you want to do it on an assignment, all the power. But I don't think you should do that on the exam. So please do not try and use visual inheritance, right? Because it can be complex and it can mess you up. If you're going to use visual inheritance, remember that what we did was, in order for you to create an abstract class or a blueprint, remember that all of your, anything you want to share and the object has to be public, right? So let's say, for example, I want to inherit from my, this group box. The group box, it has a modifier, right? As an example, my modifier is by default is private, right? If I want to share this group box when I use visual inheritance, I have to change this whole thing to public or protected, right? Would be the other option, public or protected, right? For me to be able to see something. I'm not going to ask you to do it though. I'm just telling you, if you're going to use it in the future, that's how you would be able to share information or share objects, you know, from one form to the other. Questions so far? So I've talked about forms, talked about stuff that you're going to see on the exam, you know, things I'm going to get you to play with, controls that you're going to see, and I'm also going to get you to do stuff, you know, with other Windows forms going back and forth. The about box. I made you do an about box. It's going to be in the exam, so please know how to do an about box. All right. So how do you get an about box? Who remembers how to do that? If I made a form called final form, right, as an example, right? Let's make a final form. I'm just going to make another form here. So I'm going to right click. How do you make forms? Right click, and then I'm going to add, right, which you don't have to do this. And then down here inside the quick hits, there's a Windows form, or you can go to new item, right? You're going to select Windows form anyway, or when it comes up, Windows form, and that's what we've talked about. There's tons of other stuff you can do. We're not going to do that. We've had a chance to talk about them because you've been, you know, you've kind of had a quick and dirty about how to do stuff. So we're going to call this the final form. As an example, I may ask you to do something like this exactly. So please watch carefully, right? And here's my final form. And let's say, for example, I'm going to have a menu that I'm going to put on this. So let's do this kind of stuff, right? So I'm going to go to my toolbox for my forms. And we'll just kind of go away from this for a second. So here's my form, let's say, and I want to put in a menu. So I'm going to put a menu strip. That, chances are I'll have you do a menu strip of some kind, right? I put it up on the form. Drop it anywhere on the form, and it kind of creates a little menu strip object down here, right? This tells us that there's a control with additional functionality, a class that's right here in the form, right? And if you notice this little smart arrow right here, it gives the ability to do insert standard items. Notice that insert standard items, what this does, take a look. This is new, right? If I click that, it does this for us right away. Let me undo that for a second so you can see. So I'm going to undo. Okay, so I go to the smart toolbox. This is something I didn't show you, but it's nice and easy for you and fast and dumb, right? Just letting you know. If I click on the smart arrow and go to insert standard items, bam, I get this, right? And what do I get? File, new, open, save as, everything, right? Do you need all this stuff? Hell no, but it's easy for me to go in here and take it out, right? Take out stuff that you don't need. That's a quick way of creating all the items you need. Take a look. These are standard items that exist. Here's one, an about. Let's use this one. Let's ignore the other ones for now. I'm not going to go in there and remove them, right? But this would be the way to do that. If I go click the about, right? If I double click on it, I want to do something with this. Let's double click this page, right? Notice it makes a little stub for my about tool strip menu item, right? This is what this does. I'll leave it the same way because I'm choosing standard items, right? And what I want to do is I want to show the about box. Do I have an about box to show yet? No, I need to add that in as another item. So I'm going to go to Solution Explorer again, and I'm going to right click here on the solution, and I'm going to add in a new item, right, which is an about box. This about box is a standard dialog box that we can add in, right? I'm going to get you to do this, so watch carefully. So I'm going to call it simply about box, not about box 1. All right, and click add. It's going to add an about box to the form that looks like this. I may ask you to customize this about box with other information, like I showed you earlier, right? Like putting your own name in there, right? And there's ways of doing that, because if I click onto this, notice that this is part of a grid. right? So if I edit rows and columns, you can see that it's divided right now into certain columns. There's 2 columns. One column here for this weird picture, the Windows picture, right? And you could change this to something of your own if you wanted to make sure that it melds with your app. And then on the other side, I can also go with rows, and I can change each of the values of the rows in terms of percent, and add a row or whatever, which would be my row. And then I could add something that, if I want to add additional information. Okay. But the About box gives me some general information. The information that I get from the About box, like I mentioned before, comes from your project properties. Your project properties under the application properties, you can see that there's something called assembly information. All this information here comes onto the About box, right? For example, my company name, right? And if there's a trademark, if I have something like that, as well as my description of what the app's about and what the product is, and so on, right? I can put all this stuff in there, the title and the product, and then what my version number is, my assembly version, or whatever I want in here. I could put something in here. For now, let's leave this as is, right? But if you wanted to, you could change these things inside assembly information. All right. So now, if I want to show the About box, I want you to think about it as a modal box. Remember the difference between modal and modeless? Modal means that you have to click on the OK button or the X for you to continue using your application. If it was modeless, that means I could have this up and still use my application, right? So that's the difference between modal and modeless, right? But really, at the end of the day, this thing here, this About box, is just another form, right? Which means it has a code behind file, a C# code behind file in here, and it has a bunch of different things, right? So let's save this thing for a second, and I want to show my About box when I click on my About toolstrip menu item. So how do I do that? I'm going to go About box show dialog, which is a little different than the show. It's not just show, because show is going to show the item. Here's something. Can I do About box but like this? No, I got to create the About box, because there is no About box that exists right now. Remember, it's just like launching the next form. So step 1, in this particular case, when I show the About box, here's step 1. Step 1, instantiate an object of the About box form. Right? That's the first thing. So what that means is I need to make an item of type About box, and I'm going to call this About box, lowercase a in this case, which is equal to a new About box. That's instantiated. So that creates the item itself. Step 1. Step 2, show it. Step 2, show dialog, right? Use the show dialog, if I spell properly, method of the About box. Right? So how do I do that? About box dot show dialog, which actually makes that modal form, right? That's what it does. That's it. You've got your About box. It's pretty simple, right? When this thing updates. So your About box tells you information about your application typically. So if I was to, next time, if I was going to go to the final form as an example, here's the final form, and if I was going to show, if I go to help about as an example and click about, it would pull up my About box, right? Hey, let's take a look at one more thing here. Notice the About has this little underline in here. What's that underline mean? Well, it actually tells you the shortcut, right? So it's a quick hit of knowing the shortcuts. If I go to properties here in my About toolstrip menu item, and if I go down to the name or the text, notice that there's an ampersand before the A in About, right? That's going to put the underscore underneath the A, which means that that's going to be the shortcut to get there. And notice that we have shortcut keys. There isn't anything else that does that, right? But if I go into help about, so if I press H for control H for help, right? And then A for about, right? It should bring up the About page, right? Notice I don't have that in most modern applications. Don't have that, so that's why I haven't covered it anymore, because they used to have that functionality in Windows earlier versions of Windows. All right. Really, this is kind of a throwback. So we have these underlines that still exist today, but we don't use those. We actually put in some kind of shortcut key that we want to use, like Control A, as an example. Okay, so that's how this works. And again, how could I remove stuff? Like I don't have tools. How do I remove items? I'm going to go back to this little smart arrow. So if I wanted to remove items from the menu, right, I could go to Edit Item. And I can see that there's File, Tool Strip, Edit, Tool Strip, Tools. I don't need Edit, so I can delete it. I don't know, you need Tools, so I can delete that, right? And now I have File and Help. And if I want to delete those, I can go into the actual item. Notice that there's, if I click on the actual item itself, File, Tool Strip, Menu Item, and if I go down to the collection, the drop-down items, and if I click into there, I can actually see all the items in here, like New, Open, Save, Print, Exit. I don't need any of this stuff. I just probably need Exit, right? Or Cancel, or Back, or something like that. So I can get rid of all these items too, right? So I can modify my menu items pretty simple. I'll leave that in there and press OK, right? And then I can do the same thing for help, right? So if I go click on Collections, if I click on my main item and then click on Collections, right? You can see that I got a bunch of stuff, including the About page. I don't care about Contents Index Search, so I can get rid of those. So I'll leave the separator and the About, and press OK. And when I do that and press OK again, if I go to the Help item, all I have is this, right? Exit and About, right? That's all I have. So pretty simple stuff. I want to go back, right? Here's a quick way of making a back button. If you already have a back button and an X button, quick way is copy paste, right? We talked about how to do that with forms. So I already have, I want to go back from final form. I want to go back to my previous form, which is probably going to be something like race and class form in this example. So I'm going to take my back button. Hey, wait, I'm missing a next button. I need to go next to my final form, right? So how do I do that? Well, if I go to my, I already have one in my ability generated form. Here's my ability generator form. I can steal this next button. Let's steal it. So click the next button. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to my race and class form, and I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to put it exactly where it should be, which is probably right there. Now I'm going to take my back button. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to my final form, right, and my design side and paste it. I'm going to put it where it should be, which is down here in our current design, right? So I've got the ability to go back and forth. No problem now. I've got my back button. But does the back button have any kind of, does it come with any kind of code if I copy paste? The answer is no. It doesn't come with code. It's named properly. It's styled properly, right? Named and styled properly. Like it's called back button in this form. And you can have several buttons with the same name because each button is an object, right? Inside each different form, so they don't collide. Doesn't matter. You can have the same name, the same button names in every form if you want, right? As long as you can kind of go to those buttons specifically for the form. So this is my back button. So if I want to make it go back and forth, I have to make my own code for it. Let's do it for my my race and class form. So I want to make the next button work. So double click, right? I've got a space for it. What do I need to do? There's 4 steps or 5 steps, right? Let's do it. So I want to definitely instantiate an object of my final form. So I'm going to say final form, right? We're going to call this, final form, right? Is equal to new final form. So I'm going to make a new object of that form. Now, I need somehow the ability for me to reference this form in here, which means in my final form, in my CS portion of my final form, I've got to create a property in here that basically is going to be used to reference this form, which is the race and class form, right? So I'm going to say race and prop. So first of all, I'm going to make it. I can use a prop keyword if I want, right? And instead of the type being int, I can say race and class form, right? Race and class form, and my property name is going to be called previous form. Previous form. Doesn't have to be underscore there. That's it. And now I've got getters and setters, right, for my previous form. There we go. That's an easy way to do it, right? So I've got this race and class form that is a property, right, of my final form, and it just points to the previous form. Okay, let's go back to race and class form, the code behind. Now I got to do that. I got to say something like this. I got to say final form dot previous form is equal to this, pointing to this form that I'm working on right now, which is my race and class form, right? And then when I have those two things happening, and maybe I'm going to pass information to the container class, like the character generator, the character class, I can do that. Then what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say something like, I want to show the next one and hide this one. So I'm going to say, first I'm going to show the next one. So final form dot show. I guess it's a modeless way of doing it. When I show the form, it's modeless. That means both forms can exist at the same time. And then this dot hide. I'm not going to close. If I go this dot close, it's going to create a cascade of form closing all the way to closing the entire app. All right, so this dot hide. So I'm going to show the next one, hide this one. Yay. Now let's do the same thing for my final form. I want to go back. So I'm going to do my back button. So double click. Now I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, first I'm going to show the previous form. So I'm going to say this dot previous form dot show. Oops. And then I'm going to say this dot close, which I'm going to close this one down. Now someone may say, well, what if I say this dot hide? Is that okay? Yeah, it's okay, but we want to close it down because we're going to, every time I go to this one, I'll instantiate a new one. I'm going to make a new form of this type. So it's easier, it's much better from a memory perspective to close it down. All right, so I've got my back button, and I'm going back to my previous form. So I've got the linkages now. I can actually test my app right now because I can go to my final form before I couldn't get to it before. Things about my final form that you're going to have to change, right? Remember, we talked about this. Do I want this X to be here in this particular context? Maybe I don't. So how do I do that? And do I want it to start at this particular position, which is the standard position on the top left corner of the screen? No, I want the form itself to start at center screen because that's my style. You may have something out, not center parent, center screen. There we go. And maybe I want my form size, the whole form, to be a certain size. I could check the previous form to look to see what that is. My previous form size, right, is 520 by 520. If I want to make my final form the same size, I could do that. So I can just say 520 by 520 just by changing the size of the form. So here's 520 by 520. There we go. And I also want to change the form border style, like my form border style, from sizable to fixed single, which is going to take that form border away. I want to take the control box and turn it off. So turn it to false. So that takes that away, right? And maybe what I want to do is down here, in my final form, my text should say, final form, maybe, or something else. That's the title of my form. I want to change the background color of my form to match what the other ones have, which is white. Right now, again, you can make yours whatever you want. So here's my back color, right? I could change it from control to a web color, which is white. There we go. So my form looks like the other forms now. Yay! Didn't take much, right? Let's just make sure that the back button is aligned properly, because now I have to change the back button's alignment. But I've got a form that can go back and forth, and it has the ability for me to create an about box, which I can show you. One thing that we don't have is in our file menu, I don't have my exit button working. I want to make my exit button work with my file menu. How do I do that? Double click, right? Here's my exit tool strip menu item, right? Now what do I want to do? I want to close the application, right? Not just this form. How do I close the application? How do I close the application? What's the command? What am I closing? The application.exit. Oh my God, right? That's how easy it is. So if I go application.exit, right? Then it's done. It closes the entire application. Or if I want to close the application, application.exit will close that application down from wherever you are in the application. Warning, if you actually have in future iterations, if you actually create other applications outside of this course, like for an employer, and if you do application exit somewhere else where you have files open, could corrupt the files. Remember, before you close the application, you want to close all your files down, right? Like we talked about opening and closing files. One of our project was to actually use the I/O stream, the stream reader and stream writer. You got to make sure those things are closed before you close your application. If you don't, bad things can happen, right? Negative side effects to your files. Please remember that. It doesn't have to be on the exam, but I'm just letting you know. Let's try this out. So we should be able to run this thing now and have no problems, right? Let's see how this works. So I got my random abilities generator. We made a random ability generator, remember? And then I can generate some new abilities here, right? That's a pretty bad one. That's not a bad one, but I don't like it. Maybe we can roll a couple more times to get a higher stats. Ooh, really bad. some averages, right? Okay, I'm really unlucky. Okay, wow, really average character. Just saying, there's just like nothing good can come of these 8s, right? When you play in a game, right? It's just gonna be bad for you. You get -1s. All right, so but this is okay. This might be an all right one. But let's say I don't want to make my charisma. It's tough. I want to make a rogue type character, so I want my dexterity to be higher. So I'm going to switch my charisma with my dexterity. This is the application that we've made, right? And click swap, so it does that. And I want to add 1 point to the dexterity to make it, 18, right? So I want to modify my dexterity, right? Because that's smart to do, min-maxing, right? To make my dexterity 18, I want to be the best rogue I can be. I don't know, rogues don't have to be that strong, but they have to have some charisma, a little bit of ways of talking, and all that kind of stuff. Maybe what I want to do here is I want to swap my strength with my charisma, as an example, to make me not as strong, but more charismatic. So I want to do that too, charisma and strength. So swap. There we go. So my charisma is a little bit higher now. And then I have my intelligence and wisdom. My con is pretty low. And maybe what I want to do is, depending on what I want to do, is reduce my intelligence. Not really smart, but I'm a little bit more hardy. So give me at least a +1, right? So I want to change my con and intelligence. There we go. Swap. There we go. It's a pretty decent character. Next. I'm going to click the next button now. This is going to take us to the next, to the next part, right? So here's our next part. I'm going to choose what I am: human, elf, dwarf, halfling, whatever. I'll leave it a human. Click next. I should be able to go to here, this new final form, and I'm going to click help about, which should populate my about box. This is where it comes from. I press OK. Information about the application, and then file exit will exit from my application altogether. All right, so giving you parts about moving back and forth. I want to try that again, and I want to just accept everything and move back and forth to test if it can go back and forth. I can go next. I can go back, next, next, back, right? And I can keep doing that back and forth, and it'll accept everything, right? Notice that every time I do that, right, my 10, 16, 9, 10, 16 remains. It doesn't go away. Why? Because I'm not regenerating, right, any of that stuff. I'm keeping that information inside my character class, inside my container class, which is keeping all the information between all those forms, right? I do have, on my first page, I do have an X button, because I could probably stop everything right here if I want to cancel, right? I don't have it here, right? I don't have it here, but I could go back, and I could go next. It looks like my next button is a little bit malaligned. I probably could put it down towards the bottom, or maybe align the other ones so that they're the same space as the other ones. These are just a UI UX perspective, right? Go next, and you can see that this is good. I could probably also put an exit button here, right? Exit button. Hey, this is something. We talked about this before. I want to make another button, all right? An exit button. So let's just exit the form, right? How do I do that? So, and why would I do an exit button? Sometimes, you want to put a button that kind of has similar. I want to share an event handler. This you may have to do. I want to share an event handler that's in my form. How do I do that? I don't want to have my exit button have a different event handler, because I'm already doing the application exit, right? So how do I do that? I can, first of all, let me make the button that looks the same. So I'm going to copy this one and paste it. Here's my back button, just for a style perspective. I'm going to put it at the end here. I'm going to change my back button here, so it says exit, right? Exit, or I don't know, close, or whatever you want to call it. And then my button obviously has to be the exit button. Okay? Otherwise, everything is the same. It's like the back button right now, but it doesn't have any code. And I want to use the same code that I use for my exit menu item, right? Because I don't want to use different code. How can I do that? I can choose my back button, click on the lightning bolt. When I use the click event, I can pull down an event that already exists. For example, the exit toolstrip menu button event, this one. And now my exit button will also have will utilize the same event handler, a shared event handler, which is the right way to do it. So I don't have to write additional code. Remember, don't repeat yourself, right? Use the dry method. Don't repeat yourself, DRY, right? So that way, if we do, and that should be a good way of thinking about how to reuse code, right? If I can reuse the code that already exists, that's better than making new code. because it makes it more efficient. Let's try this now and see if it works. So I made a new button. I'm saving everything. And I'm going to go next, next. And notice that I have the exit button now. And if I click exit, it stops my application just like the tool menu does. Okay, one more thing before we stop. And then we're going to stop for questions. And that's it for today, right? Because it's just a review, right? So I'm going to take questions about your assignments. Anything else? I got to talk to you guys in class here. Anything else that you haven't done? I want to talk to you guys about things you haven't done, right? If you haven't had anything in, you know, that kind of stuff. Because the rest you should be able to do from what we've talked about already. So let's say, for example, in the future, your boss does ask you to add in a tool strip menu item, and we haven't covered that. How do you do that? If I go to Toolbox, and if I go to Menus and Toolbars, and I want to add in a tool strip, and I've kind of added in, right? Here's my tool strip. Notice that my tool strip is here. If I click on the arrow, insert standard items. What does this do? It adds all these, right? So that way it's nice and easy from a file, open, you know, save, whatever. Now, in our particular case, it doesn't make any sense, right? For a new item or an open or a save or, you know, print or whatever. None of these really make sense. And so I haven't really talked about them, right? You know, but you can always download other icons, right, to make work. So if let's say, for example, you don't want to use a standard icon set, let's just undo that. I'm going to show you this. And you can always download through NuGet. Remember that Visual Studio has a package manager too. It's called NuGet. Remember, we talked about this a couple times. And the NuGet package manager can be found if I click on the actual project or the solution, right? I can say Manage NuGet Packages for Solution, or right-click on the package, on the project, and say Manage NuGet Packages. If I click there, I've already done this work for you. If I want to see installed packages, I can click on installed. I've installed one called Font Awesome Sharp, right? Which is a NuGet package that you can use to use Font Awesome icons inside your Windows forms, right? So Font Awesome is like a standard icon set that we use in the web. But to make your stuff more useful, you can download something called Font Awesome Sharp, right? Okay, I've already downloaded this just to make this really quick. You can also go through the download process, right? But after you download Font Awesome Sharp, I want to use my tool strip menu item to add Font Awesome icons. How do I do that? Well, just like the tool strip menu item is here without the standard tools, I can just click this down arrow, and actually it's been here the whole time through this lesson so far, right? And if I click down into this icon tool strip button, I can do that, right? Here's the one. When I do that, I can choose on the right inside my properties, this is an example, right, of what kind of icon I want. Right now it's the star icon. And let's say, for example, I want something like a file icon, my file icon. I could choose one that's in here, right, as an example, called file. I could kind of search for the one. Now, unfortunately for this, the way they've done things, one thing I don't like about this little package, it doesn't allow you to find the file by yourself. Like if I was to type in something like file, right, and I keep typing, it's going to just going to change my stuff, right? So I got to kind of, you know, click the F a bunch of times until I find the file that I want, the one that I want, which is file. Notice that it'll change the icon a bunch of times, right? Until I find the right one. This is my file that I want, my file icon, right? Oops. File icon, right? Of course, I lost it. So I changed something else. There it is. And with the file icon, if you don't like the size of it because it's pretty small, right? This file icon, I could make it so that it fits the same size. Notice that on the bottom here, I have size is 23 by 22, right? And one of the things that this says is my image scaling is size to fit, right? I want to put none, right? And I want to change this to whatever size I want. From my icon size could be 32, right? And now my icon size could be as big as I want it, which is pretty good, right? So you can make some really stylish icons here with Font Awesome, right? So, and if you want to have a different kind of button, so it's not this type of button, right? I can remove it. One more time. This is just extra for you guys, right? So let's say, for example, I want an icon drop-down button. So my file, like the file menu, right? So let's say icon drop-down button, right? And this is the button that I want. And again, I can do the same thing. So I can make it so that this one is 32. That's probably what I should have done in the first place. Instead of size to fit, I can choose in none. And I can choose, instead of a star, I don't want the star, but I want to use the file flag font. And as you can check different ones out, everything with F on it, right? Folder, right? Folder options, flag, file. And then underneath that, I want to have an exit, so I can do the same thing. I can drop down another icon menu item, right? That's another option. So inside in here, I can do the same thing. I want to look for the Font Awesome has a bunch of icons, and if you want to know what they are, you can always go to Font Awesome to figure them out. Here's Font Awesome, right? Font Awesome. And if I go there, right, and if I want to see an icon, like I want to search for an icon, I can click Icons. And under Icons, I can look for something like Exit. So if there's might be an exit button, that makes sense, right? So times circle, that might be one. And here's external link, that's not it. Times circle, this one, X. So it just says times, right? That might be okay as well for the exit button, right? To exit. So a little down, you can do a thing that looks like a menu if you really want to as well, or a sign out. That's kind of close, right? But I want to either choose this one, times circle, or times, one of those things, times circle or times. And I can do that just to make it look and feel a little differently, right? So I can go into the icon again. Here's my icon. I can change this to 32. Right? I can, again, I don't want to scale to fit, so I want to make sure that it's the same size as my other button, right? Let's say, and I want to change it from the type from star, right, to times. So I'll start typing T until I find the right one that I want. Oh, I passed one. Tag. The only thing I don't like about this one, which is like time circle, there it is, time circle. And notice that there's a it displays both the text, right, as well as what it says. Our text says icon menu item 1. I could change the text to like exit. I really want to be just the same as everything else we've seen. I can use the ampersand exit to give me that look and feel of the exit, right? And now when I run this application, just to show you what it looks like, right? I have this little menu, right? And if I click on exit, it doesn't do anything until I set it up. Let's set it up. So I can do two things. I can go here, exit, or I can go here, exit. I just wanted to show you how it looks like with the menu, just so you have it, so you've seen it one time, right? I don't expect you to remember this for the exam at all. So how do I set that up? Same way. So I go here, double click, right? I could make my own, or I can point to this one. Let's point to that one instead. How do I do it? Same way. So here, click onto it, go to the lightning bolt, and pick this exit tool strip menu item, right? Which means now I can go back to here and notice that it's gone. And if I run this again, now we have an exit that exits both places. All three places, actually. So exit does this one, this does exit, and so does this one, right? Menu, standard icon sets or whatever. You can make any icon set you like, by the way. If you can make your own. You can also use your own images if you want, to customize stuff. It's not that difficult to make things work out. And I'm just using Font Awesome because we've been using Font Awesome on the JavaScript side, and you may have seen it a bunch of times. Other places, a very popular icon set. It's lightweight and it's kind of interesting, makes it interesting. But if we have this, chances are we don't need these, right? So I mean, I'm just telling you. Normally we don't have this kind of thing happen. Usually this points to this, a file or whatever. But sometimes what happens is, you want both things, depending on if you want to, exit or whatever. Help. Is there a help icon for Font Awesome? I could probably put something else like that to see if there is anything. A help. There is an info for help or a question mark. That might be better. Question circle, right? Or a question, right? So I could do that too if I wanted to. Let's add that in just while we're at it. So I could do a icon drop-down menu button, this one. And again, I would do the same steps just to show you. So 32. I don't want it to scale to fit, so I want it to be the same size. By the way, you can change whatever size you want in here and change the star instead of star to a question. So Q, circle, perfect, right? And now what I want to do is when I go down in here, I want to make it so that it's the about, right? So if I go back here and if I look for about, probably it's going to be the info. Nope, let's go info for info. Probably the right thing to put in. Info circle. I don't know, I can use info or info circle. I like info circle, so that's the one I want to use. So now I can do the same thing for here. I want to pull down info circle, which is the icon menu item. It's only special. This is only for Font Awesome. These ones come into play because I've downloaded the Font Awesome set, right? So again, I do the same thing down here, really quickly, and then you'll see an example of this stuff later on. 32. I don't want to scale to fit. In this particular case, no. And I want to change my star to a info. That's the only part I don't like. Fit, info circle. Perfect. All right, and down here it should say about. Instead of info icon menu item, you should say about. And if you want to, you can put that little underline by pressing the ampersand like this. So there's about, okay. And so now I've made items like this, and if I want to use the way of some kind of event handler, shared event handler, I want to kind of use the same about tool strip menu item thing, and now when I run it, right, you can see that it's more graphical. So next, and I have both the file menu as well as the icon menus, and I can go to the about page here and pull up my about. Same. Yes.
So not to create the application, but how we can run it in other PC?
What do you mean? It'll run on any PC. Once I build my application, right, and I give it to you, it'll run. Yes. Yes, that's what it does. Actually, if I one thing we haven't talked about is how to do that, right? So how do I use the executable file? Well, remember that when I build everything, that's a very good question. So if you look at the, this is my entire document, right? This is my project. Notice that if I click open this, I have a bin, a debug, right? And I have this executable file right here, right? exe, right here. This executable file, if I gave it to you, you could run it. As long as I have, see this font awesome sharp.dll, I got to give you that too. Once I give you these two files, you're good to go. Right? So I give you this whole folder, right, with all this stuff. I don't have to, but this one for sure you need, and you need this one. Right? Let me show you what that is. So this sharp.dll, and then this exe, the exe file and the sharp.dll, and you're good to go. Because it's going to search for the sharp.dll. The DLL is the dynamic link library for your application. Right? So how do I do those two things? How do I do that? How do I find those items? Well, if I right click, and if I want to open up in Explorer, here's my file Explorer. There it is. There's my executable right there, right? So if I took this one, and I gave them to you, so let me double click and see. I'm just double click this right now, right, and see what happens. There it is. This is my app, right? And it's independent. It's like this is my actual app. It's running for. I can give you this app, and it runs on your system, right? Now, there's going to be certain things for this app to work on your system. There's going to be requirements, right? Because my app uses Windows 10, right? Where the latest version of Visual Studio, I'm using the .NET Framework 4.6.1, right? That's really important to understand that. So your system to run this thing would have to have 4.6.1 in the .NET Framework. It's going to ask you if you want to load that up, right? Or it'll give you a warning saying you don't have the right framework. It may ask you for other things as well, because each app has its own requirements. But more or less, it's ready to go. I can package it off to you and give it to you. There's other ways. We haven't had a chance to do the packaging piece, but there is a way of creating a wizard that actually allows you to install, like an installer. That comes with, actually it's part of Visual Studio. You can download a little pack. What it does is it allows you to install the application from the beginning to the end. Right? Yes, once you set it up, but what it does when you set it up, it actually changes your registry on your machine, on your Windows machine, changes the registry, add registration values and key values, key value pairs inside your registry so that it knows where to find your application and how to make shortcuts for your app. It's another application. It's an actual setup application, right? Well, actually, part of it exists here. That's a very, very good question. So it's not really part of my review, but what the hell, right? Well, let's talk about it. So we're done with this thing. We've done with my little app. I've shown you a little bit of menu items and as well as tool strips. We're not going to use tool strips on the exam, just putting it out there. I'm just showing you just so that you've seen it. So you can't say, Tom never showed us, right? Yeah, I did last day. But if you go to, if I close the solution off for a second, and if I want to do a new solution, so I use a new project, right? There's many, many projects here, right? Many, many projects. So if we look at Visual C#, right? You can see that there's tons and tons of projects you can create, like other project types. One of them, if I go down here, is a setup and deployment project, which is Enable Install Shield Limited Edition, right? This one here. So here's my setup project. We're just going to call it Setup 1. We'll put it inside of our COMP123. There it is. So I'm just making this setup. It should be this Enable Install Shield Limited Edition should be part of your Visual Studio 2015. Right? Nothing for me to do here. I'm not going to create a Git repository for this one, all right? But I'm just going to press OK, see what happens. So here's my initial, my install shield, and if you follow the directions, verify that your computer has a network connection, go to the download website, and tells you how to install shield, right? And then if you follow the directions, right, by Flixera, you can download, you can kind of put in some information about you. Install Shield Limited Edition for Visual Studio 2015 now available. Yes. Probably not. Actually, you know what? The answer is I don't know. It depends on your professor. I don't know what they do, right? You'll be talking about delegates for sure. You'll be talking about delegates. You'll be talking about event handlers by hand. You'll be running your own event handlers by hand. You'll be talking about more data. A lot of special effects with C#, more Windows forms. My recommendation is this is for programming 3 you're talking about? Yeah, lots of other stuff. And I don't really know all the other things they're doing because I haven't run that course before. But you can expect more advanced stuff, things like concurrency. You're probably talking about a little bit more about concurrency. Asynchronous programming, that kind of stuff. You'll probably learn a bit more about that stuff. And things that we haven't been able to cover in the course, like I said. EF framework, again, we touched upon, we kind of scratched the surface on entity framework. We'll probably do it again in your programming 3, amongst other things. More generics, all about generics, collections, all those kind of things. You'll be talking about those again, and more in depth than we kind of just talked about the list generic, but there's many other kinds of generics, how to create a generic object altogether, those kind of things. You'll be learning about those things a lot. So that's the kind of stuff that you'll be doing more. And of course, you need to know object-oriented programming. You need to know all the things we know from this course, right? So that's you should be prepared for that. But if you fill out this information, and then you can download, download now as an example. After you've done this information, you'll be able to download, install Shield, and make it work, right? So that's how you do that. And install Shield will actually give you a limited edition. Will give you a little bit of how do I package stuff together. It's a very simple, like a little wizard to make the wizards kind of thing, right? It tells you which project you want to add, and packages up together, and it creates a whole project just to make installation projects. It's a really cool little thing, right? But that's how you get it from. Any other questions around the stuff we've talked about so far? We've talked about Windows forms, right? And this second half was all about Windows forms. We did do a little bit of exception handling and validation. We talked about those things as well. But more or less, more of the second part of this course was all around Windows forms. All right, so that's what your exam is going to be all around. Please look at the stuff we just talked about last week, which is the character generator, because a lot of the stuff we covered in the character generator covers many of the aspects that you're going to be talking about in your exam, right? So it's a good thing to look over. Take a look at that character generator, right? Any other questions before we stop? And I'll take individual questions for your assignment, your final assignments, and all that kind of stuff. Any other questions? Okay, that's it for me for the review. And then I'll see you guys on Friday if you want to stick around for any kind of questions. Otherwise, you're free to go.